Happy Monday and welcome back to Learn with Lo. For everybody joining us live, I am pumped to continue and really wrap up our autoimmunity series that we've been diving into here in this month of May. So if you've been keeping up with us, we've been talking really all of the ins and outs around some of these more up and coming, maybe a little bit more mysterious autoimmune type symptoms and diagnoses that are becoming more and more prevalent and popular. Especially as we see more individuals suffering with chronic disease patterns, gut dysbiosis, hormonal imbalance symptoms. Obviously, our environment creates some epigenetic factors that really can set off some of this cascade that impacts our gut, which then impacts our immune system. So with our autoimmunity series, we've gotten a chance to really outline what is autoimmune disease. We got a chance to discuss how autoimmune disease is a three-legged stool, so to speak. There is a genetic predisposition, but there has to be an epigenetic or environmental trigger that sets that off and contributes to a concept that we call leaky gut. We're going to be getting into this concept of leaky gut a little bit more today as we talk about some of the different functional medicine approaches, some of the different diet strategies out there that are really touted and marketed towards individuals that are suffering from autoimmune disease. What we also got a chance to talk about was the progression of autoimmune disease, really talking about stage 1, more silent autoimmunity, where we have really some of the symptoms that get really easily overlooked, and we tend to push them off or push through these symptoms, whether, symptoms as much as fatigue, brain fog, muscle aches. And this is where we start to kind of develop some of those coping mechanism habits of fueling ourselves with caffeine, turning to things like alcohol and food to really kind of cope with these energy deficiencies. And then if we don't necessarily listen to those symptoms or do something about them, or have some poor coping strategies, then it can progress into some more stage 2, where we have the symptoms, we're also having some antibodies present. And this is where we start to see some of that downstream bigger symptom exacerbations. Like now we're seeing our doctor because we have things like anxiety, depression, exhaustion, insomnia, overt gut issues, inflammation, blood sugar imbalances. We feel like we're sick all the time. And maybe our labs, even at this point, we feel lousy, but most of our labs from a diagnostic perspective kind of come back normal. And in that sense, then we feel kind of like a sitting duck, and we recognize that there's signs and symptoms of our day-to-day to where we don't feel normal, but we're not really able to pinpoint why, right? So that's where then we can eventually get into a stage 3 full-blown autoimmune disease, where we are actually getting the symptoms paired with the antibodies present, paired with downstream catabolic tissue dysfunction, right? So that's really what's happening in an autoimmune pattern. We get an overzealous immune system. That overzealous immune system has a target tissue, whether it's the thyroid and it turns into Hashimoto's, or an MS, which is more of a neurological manifestation of it, rheumatoid arthritis, which is more of a joint manifestation of it. You name it, really, it's the immune system that is in overdrive and causing downstream catabolic responses. So when we know that, then we can start to take a step back and say, okay, well, what is exacerbating this? What's going to exacerbate that stage 1 to stage 3 autoimmune progression? And what is going to kind of be some more big picture, holistic view treatment strategies that we really want to be supporting these individuals with known autoimmune disease patterns with? And those of us that don't have these patterns, how can we proactively do some of these same treatment strategies for our own health to prevent us from getting into a situation like that down the road, or at least increase our chances of success there? So last week, we really talked about the progression of this is going to be fueled by cortisol, specifically cortisol induced from a stress perspective, which is why a lot of times individuals that do have full-blown autoimmune disease, they can tell you pretty close that a lot of their flares are during times of more stress, right? So when we talk about cortisol, I don't like to talk about cortisol in the sense of the most unhelpful sentence that can come out of a practitioner's mouth, which is like, oh, you just need to manage your stress. Oh, we just need to reduce our stress. It's like that is not helpful, not actionable at all, because it's unrealistic to say that we're not going to be constantly inundated with stress. That's not the point, is to eliminate your stress. The point is to not store your stress. That's really what we talked about last week. That's what I made some multiple different Instagram posts and reels about, is this concept of stored stress. We need to have an outlet for cortisol, and we need to have a body that is resilient to cortisol. Not this utopian society that's like, oh, we're eventually just going to be able to manage our health when all of our stress is gone. That is kind of a sitting duck mentality, and that's not going to really serve anybody very well. So don't expect to get rid of your stress. Don't wait until life is less stressful to work on your health. The goal is to recognize that stress is going to happen. It's going to happen to all of us. And how are we releasing that cortisol? Through things like movement, through our breath work, through our balanced blood sugar, through our anti-inflammatory nutrition, through our hydration and minerals, through our nervous system regulation work. Like, all of those things are actionable tools that I'm helping individuals with to manage their stress. That's what I mean when I mean manage your stress. Those are actionable items, things we can actually control. That is proactive health, right? Now, the hard part, and what we'll get into today, is really looking at the concept of being a little bit vulnerable in this position, especially when an individual is under that kind of stage 3 full autoimmune progression. They know they have a certain diagnosis that's looming, or they might have a family history of it. And so they're trying to be very proactive in and of themselves, which I think is great. But in the functional medicine space, I do feel like there's a little bit of vulnerability in that spot, and then they can really be targeted and really kind of taken advantage of. And this is what I mean when I talk about different protocols out there, whether it's supplement protocols or autoimmune disease diet, and all of these types of things that can be rather extreme. And I want to at least make sure that we're wrapping up our autoimmune series talking about the world of nutrition and supplementation, and how do I view this world a little bit differently. You can already tell how I view it differently, because I'm not just talking about the role of nutrition. I'm talking about nervous system regulation. I'm talking about stored stress. I'm talking about leaky gut, right? So it's like, oh, there's a way bigger picture here, but we can't deny the fact that autoimmune disease is a profitable business, and a lot of functional and or holistic practitioners do kind of find themselves trying to sell you the perfect protocol here, or selling you the idea that diet is a number one way to be able to put your autoimmune disease into full remission. Those are some pretty big and bold claims to be making, especially based off of nutrition alone. And the most popular of these being the Autoimmune Protocol Diet. Or Autoimmune Paleo Protocol Diet is kind of what it's been named before as well. If you're familiar with the acronym, it is AIP. So the AIP diet, that's what I'll be kind of referring to it going forward. It was developed back in 2015 by Dr. Terry Walls. So there does have it is toted in research. This particular doctor, if you, like I said, do any more digging or research on her, she's actually a very cool gal. I've listened to her on a ton of different podcasts. She personally dealt with an MS diagnosis herself, and really worked over the course of years to make it her life's mission to be able to teach people how to put their autoimmune disease into remission using different dietary protocols, but also a lot of lifestyle medicine as well too. So this AIP diet is probably one of the more restrictive elimination diets that's out there. It is the theory of the autoimmune protocol diet is that we want to remove or restrict any foods that could potentially be causing an inflammatory reaction in the body, or could be exacerbating an immune response, or could be contributing to a leaky gut. So the whole theory behind it is if we remove these foods, we then get to allow the gut as an opportunity to heal itself. And by restoring this gut balance, you can then have proper immune system regulation and put your autoimmune disease into remission. That is the theory, right? Pretty bold claim, considering that an AIP protocol is like an elimination diet, but kind of on steroids. So with the elimination diet of an AIP, no gluten, no grains at all, no greens, no legumes or beans, no dairy, no eggs, no nuts, no seeds, no nightshades like tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, peppers, no vegetable or seed oils. All processed foods are out, all food additives are out, all like gums, like guar gums are out, alcohol is out, sugar alcohols are out. So you're like, oh my gosh, Lauren, what do I eat, right? So with this pretty restrictive AIP diet, it is promoting high quality protein sources. So there's a really big push for sourcing grass-fed organic meats, organic pasture-raised poultry, wild-caught fish, organ meats, fruit, some fruit. You'll hear kind of a mixed bag on like fruit allowed or fruit not allowed. Olive oil, coconut oil, avocado oil, bone broth, some fermented foods, vinegar is allowed, green tea or herbal teas are allowed. So pretty limited, but we also have to respect and recognize that not everybody is going to be able to have access to that type of sourced food. Not even throwing into the equation here the concept of cooking for multiple different palates within a home, the concept of eating with a family, the concept of trying to accomplish this outside of the home or in any sort of social situation. So this is where I really want to caution and give you guys the information that like, hey, AIP protocol, AIP diet, it's out there and it will blow up everywhere. But I always want to make sure that those individuals that are dealing with an autoimmune disease or and they're feeling vulnerable already, I don't want them to accidentally get sucked into this pretty drastic functional medicine's view of making rather bold claims that you're going to put your autoimmune disease into remission with diet alone. Now, do I feel strongly about the fact that nutrition is going to be a foundational pillar in managing autoimmune disease? Yes, 1,000% I do. But to say that it's the only thing, I don't think so, right? And I'll share a couple stories of why I have come to find that out either through my training professionally, but also through my personal interactions with lots of different clients, right? So I'll even give you a story of one of my patients who worked with me for about 5 months. And in that 5-month time frame, she had came to me with a lupus diagnosis, chronic gut issues. She had even had some gut bleeding at one point in time, or when I say gut bleeding, I should say blood in her stools. She also had extreme fatigue, anxiety, lots of energy issues, was not sleeping well at all. And with all of this came to me already doing so many of these things. She's like, yep, so I've been researching my lupus and I cut out gluten, I cut out dairy, I cut out all sugars, I cut out all of my processed meat sources. I buy everything free range, organic. I even cut out oxalates and anti-nutrients. And like she was going on and on about all of the different things that she had researched and with really good intention had put into her day-to-day. And she was still having these symptoms. None of them had went away. They were all just lingering. They were there. She's like, nope, I'm not really feeling any better. And I've been trying to manage this on my own. And I've been following you for a while. And I just felt like it was time to reach out. So we did comprehensive labs on her. I looked at the whole picture, right? We're looking at everything from blood sugar balance. We're looking at adrenal health. We're looking at minerals. We're looking at thyroid. We're looking at sex hormones. We're looking at the big picture because it's not just lupus. It's not just her fatigue, right? It's like, how are all of these interplaying with each other and creating a bigger autoimmune picture or fueling an autoimmune picture? So over the course of about 4 or 5 months working together, she was able to not be as restrictive. She was able to add in more foods, which was my ultimate goal for her. So by the time we were in month 5, I was pushing her because she was feeling so good. She's like, Lauren, I've never slept through the night before. I actually am dreaming. She's like, I have enough energy to play with my kids after work. She's like, I have enough energy to actually like wake up and get a workout in. I'm not crashing during the day. I'm not as short-tempered. I'm not as irritable. Like, she's like, I didn't even know that like I could feel this good. And I'm like, okay, now our goal is to start to like diversify. Let's work on our relationship with food. You've like been such in that elimination spectrum for so long that now that's not going to really support your long-term health. We need to rebuild the gut microbiome and rebuild diversity. So that was a large part of our work together, was looking at the bigger picture and recognizing that like she had done so many powerful things from a food perspective, but her only understanding from a food perspective was what not to eat, what to eat less of, what to cut out. It was very much in this like restriction, negative type of mentality. And not saying that some of those, like pulling out some of those more inflammatory foods and looking at the quality of our foods wasn't a good move. It was, but it wasn't enough. That was like you said, it didn't move the needle for her. So we were able to take that and I'm like, okay, this is what we really need to be thinking about when it comes to this nutrition pillar of autoimmune disease to reverse a leaky gut. Like we can't just look at nutrition. We have to zoom out and recognize that there is a bigger picture at play here. And there was multiple things within nervous system regulation, blood sugar balance, adrenal health, nutrient deficiencies that when we corrected those, she realized that it wasn't about the elimination, right? So that's where, like anecdotally, I can share so many stories about that of individuals coming to me, having really gone through the ringer of some pretty extensive elimination type protocols, and they still end up finding me and they're like, there's got to be something more than this. And I'm like, I know. And you didn't probably need that level of extensive elimination, or quite frankly, we don't even know what type of elimination we might need until we address the foundations first. So when I think about like kind of the dangers and the limitations of the AIP diet, I've alluded to a few of these. One, we have to recognize first and foremost that autoimmune disease is more than just a leaky gut. It's one part, very much one part of it, but it's more than a leaky gut, and a leaky gut is more than just your nutrition. There's so many more things that are going to be contributing. If it were just as simple as like, oh, remove these, then nobody would deal with intestinal permeability. Nobody would deal with autoimmune disease. Nobody would deal with food sensitivities, like all of these very real things that are plaguing individuals. It's not just nutrition. That is a huge, huge pillar, but it also has to be taking into account what is the rest of the body and the hormonal systems doing. So once we recognize that autoimmune disease is more than just a leaky gut, and we recognize that leaky gut is more than just a nutrition protocol, it's pretty quick for us to recognize what are some of the limitations of this AIP protocol. So the AIP does not correct or address stored stress or stored cortisol. Like we talked about last week, it is a huge part of the autoimmune disease progression and is going to be a huge part of the healing process, is having strategies to be able to release stored stress. Sometimes it can even make it worse, because imagine if your nutrition strategy or your diet is a stressor, you have to think about food multiple times a day, every day for the rest of your life. Don't make it stressful by thinking like, ooh, I can't eat that, can't eat that, can't eat that, can't eat that. And now all of a sudden we're building more stress and more anxiety based off of a diet pattern that's supposed to be very healing for us. That doesn't make much sense, right? Because we're really just breaking down as much as we're building up. So we have to be able to have a nutrition strategy, yes, but it cannot cause more anxiety or anxiousness. So it doesn't correct or address adrenal stress or stored stress. AIP also doesn't correct or address like drainage or toxin exposure, which is a big part of the autoimmune disease progression as well. It can also actually make it worse, because imagine removing all of these like really intentionally healthful foods from our diet, things like legumes and beans and grains, and things like eggs and nuts and seeds. Like these are all great sources of fiber. How do you think that we detox our body? We got to poop every day. So a lot of times, even individuals going on something like an AIP protocol or an AIP diet end up immensely constipated. And that is like the total opposite of what I want to be doing if someone's struggling with an autoimmune disease or a leaky gut, is to make them constipated. It's like, no, we need to be moving things out of the system now more than ever. AIP also doesn't correct or address dysfunctions in circadian rhythm, light and dark cycle of the sun, how we relate and correspond to nature, how we sleep, how we rest, how we recover. Sometimes, again, AIP can even make it worse, because look at this gal who came to me cutting out all of these foods, and she's like, Lauren, I don't sleep. I'm like, that's a problem. That to me is a bigger gut healing modality for us than cutting out 15 things from your diet. Like, we got to get you sleeping, or we're not going to be able to move the needle very much, right? So pick your poison here. I'm not going to have you start a diet that creates so much depletion that you're not able to make enough melatonin or neurotransmitters, and now your sleep sucks. It's like, what are we doing? Creating trading one problem for an even bigger problem. AIP also doesn't correct or address blood sugar imbalances. Again, can also even make that picture way worse. AIP also doesn't correct or address things like mineral or nutrient deficiencies, and in fact can make those things way worse, right? So even the original founder of the Autoimmune Protocol, or even practitioners that have used the AIP diet in the past and kind of like lived and died by it, I've heard a lot of them even backtrack a little bit, and they're like, yeah, you know, it's one of those where I might have started people on it and they felt like so great, so fantastic for 2 weeks until they didn't. And now they're starting to see worsening health outcomes by keeping these individuals on this diet for long term. So that's probably one of the biggest misunderstandings, is like, these elimination diets, they were not to be meant to be followed long term, but these people pick it up off of Google, right? You get an autoimmune disease diagnosis, the first thing you start to do is just fill yourself with information and resources, which is great. But if that's the first thing that pops up on Google is like AIP diet, and you start doing it and recognize that like, oh, I wasn't supposed to live like this for the rest of my life. It's like, hell no, like that is not what we needed. We didn't even need that level of elimination. We don't know, because we haven't addressed the foundations first. So also I have to give a respectful nod to the fact that this type of diet strategy is also blatantly inappropriate for anybody that has had a history of disordered eating patterns. And let's be real, that is most women. It doesn't have to be a full-blown eating disorder, but most women in my practice that I see, even some of my males that I see, have disordered eating tendencies. They have a lot of food rules. They have a lot of restrictive eating tendencies. They have a lot of orthorexic eating tendencies. And so putting someone on further elimination that already has a history of restriction and elimination, no bueno, not going there. No, not even touching that. So we can't just live and die by these drastic elimination diets that may actually make the long-term picture worse for what in theory sounds like a short-term gain. We have to recognize that autoimmune disease is more than a leaky gut, and leaky gut is more than an AIP diet. There has to be so much more. So to really do the right way, in my mind, around building an autoimmune disease protocol, is it really has to be very individualized and very customized. So that's why, yes, it is beneficial that you're working with a practitioner that knows what they're doing versus you just out there stabbing in the dark, hoping for the best. Like spending a shorter amount of time doing it right and getting better results versus years and years of stabbing around and not really moving the needle very much. So that's really what I I like to help people do is like, let's get in, let's fix it, and let's let you roll. Like this gal that I was talking about, she'd been trying to navigate these issues on her own for years. She'd been having symptoms for probably close to 10 years. She'd been actively trying to manage it herself for at least the last few years. And then she came to me and we worked on it within 4-6 months. And she's flying like an eagle. It's like that right there is efficiency. So the right way to kind of build an autoimmune protocol is we want to make it customized. We want to make it very individualized. We also don't want to necessarily do more. We want to do different. We want to be very specific in terms of what we want to do different, but I don't want it to feel depleting, right? We cannot deplete an already depleted system. So yes, we're going to recognize the role of nutrition. I do think there's a conversation about removing inflammatory foods, not necessarily removing healthy foods, but removing inflammatory foods while keeping as much plant diversity in our diet as possible. If you want immune resilience, then you want microbiome diversity. That is huge. And you don't do that by cutting out all of our plant foods or really like narrowing in and eating like the same 3 or 5 foods on rotation. That is not going to be a really great strategy if we truly want to reverse kind of a leaky gut scenario. Focus on inclusion, not exclusion. You're not meant to follow an elimination diet for long term. You are going to risk nutrient deficiencies or disordered eating habits with food. Number 3, we want to make sure that we have an aspect in there to support and respect the nervous system. You cannot tackle gut health without tackling adrenal health first, right? Don't trade problems with sleep for an elimination diet. Things like connecting with nature, circadian rhythm, really the life force of the gut. We have to really engage the enteric nervous system in order to heal there. And then we also want to make sure that we have part of our protocol of respecting things like toxin exposure and opening our drainage and detox pathways. I can't just turn around and take all the fiber out and constipate somebody when we're trying to really support drainage through sweat, adequate liver detoxification, which requires B vitamins and amino acids. I want to get somebody pooping every day. You're always going to be exposed to toxins, just like you're always going to be exposed to stress. So it's more our ability to see these toxins and get rid of them, or same thing, see these stressors, but get rid of them and not store them. That's what it looks like to really take account like the whole person and not just a diagnosis, right? There's a bigger picture at play here. So it will take an integrative team. It's not just, like I said, solely one person or solely one thing. And so that's where if you've heard of a practitioner or someone is kind of selling you this fancy protocol that's really just looking at one thing, it's like it's probably not just going to be one thing. And that's where supporting the entire person is so immensely helpful. So hopefully this was helpful for you guys to hear a little bit about the AIP diet, if that's been on your radar before, or you have a loved one, or you personally are thinking about and putting autoimmune disease on your radar, either from a preventative and a proactive standpoint, which I love, or a standpoint of trying to manage or mitigate progression or symptom flare of an active autoimmune disease pattern. So it takes a village. It's not just one person, but if you haven't really thought about the role of a functional nutrition approach in this, I wouldn't jump to an AIP. I would make sure that you are understanding what all of the constituents are of your entire hormone hierarchy and really working from the foundation up. So if you want assistance with that, you have any questions, or you're curious about any of my coaching options, feel free to click the link in my Instagram bio. There you'll be able to be directed to some of my courses that are on Renew University that you could start right away, like Master Your Metabolism or my Renew Your Gut Health courses, or you can even jump right into my signature program, which is my 12-week Revive, Restore, Renew You course on there as well too. If you're interested in more one-on-one coaching or comprehensive labs, click the link in my bio to apply to work with me one-on-one as well too. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will be back next month of June for more Learn with Love.